Imagine you are Anatoly Karpov in 1980. You are the world champion. You are a cold, calculating machine who thrives on order, logic, and punishing the slightest deviation from classical theory. You walk into the European Team Championship expecting a serious battle against the British legend Tony Miles. You sit down, you fix your suit, you play the most solid move in the history of the game, and then your opponent plays a move so disrespectful, so theoretically garbage, that you probably looked around for a hidden camera. Tony Miles didn't just bring a knife to a gunfight, he brought a rubber chicken. Today we are looking at the game that proved that in chess, if you're brave enough, rules are merely suggestions. This is the story of the incorrect opening that shook the world, where the world champion starts the game with pawn to e4, the gold standard of opening principles. He's taking the center, opening lines for his bishop and queen. Standard stuff. Tony Miles looks him dead in the eye and responds with pawn to a6. The room goes silent. This is the St. George defense, or as most grandmasters called it back then, a waste of time. It does absolutely nothing for the center. It's the chess equivalent of starting a 100-meter sprint by tying your shoelaces together. Karpov, unfazed but surely annoyed, occupies the middle with pawn to d4, and Miles continues his eccentric plan with pawn to b5. Karpov develops normally with knight to f3, and Miles finally puts a piece on the board with bishop to b7. He's attacking the center from the sidelines like a sniper in a bush. Karpov develops his bishop to d3. Miles brings out his knight to f6, and the queen slides to e2. White is playing proper chess, while black is playing whatever this is. Miles plays pawn to e6, and Karpov decides to challenge the weird structure immediately with pawn to a4. Miles isn't scared. He strikes at the center with pawn to c5. The tension rises as Karpov plays pawn takes c5 and the bishop takes c5. Karpov develops his last minor piece, knight to d2, and Miles pushes pawn to b4, cramping White's style. Karpov leaps forward with pawn to e5, kicking the horse, so the knight goes to d5. The world champion maneuvers his knight to e4, targeting the weak spots, and Miles retreats his bishop to e7. Both kings decide it's time to hide, so Karpov goes kingside castle, and Miles develops his knight to c6. Karpov places his bishop on d2, and the black queen moves to c7. Now, Karpov tries to break the position with pawn to c4, but Miles is ready with pawn takes c4. The knight takes c4, and the knight takes c4. Karpov recaptures with bishop takes c4, and Miles brings his last piece into the game with knight to b4. He's harassing the bishop, so Karpov swaps it off. Bishop takes b4, and bishop takes b4. The position is opening up. Karpov swings his rook to c1, pinning the queen's gaze, so the queen moves to b6. Karpov develops his bishop to e4, a powerhouse in the center, and Miles finally finds the time to kingside castle. Karpov eyes the king with knight to g5, and Miles creates a hook with pawn to h6. Karpov delivers a cheeky check with bishop to h7, forcing the king to h8. The bishop retreats to b1 and the bishop moves to e7. The game is reaching a boiling point. Around this stage, many players would panic against a world champion, but Miles understood a deep positional truth. By playing 1 to a6, he didn't just provoke Karpov, he took Karpov out of his preparation. Karpov spent his entire life studying how to beat the Sicilian and the Ruy Lopez. He had 0 pages of notes on how to deal with a pawn on a 6. Miles traded correctness for psychological discomfort, and it was working beautifully. Karpov moves his knight to e4, looking for an entry point. Miles challenges the file with rook to a c8. Karpov brings the queen to d3, lining up a battery against the king, and Miles initiates the trade. Rook takes c1. The rook takes c1 back. Now Miles gets greedy, or rather, brave. He plays queen takes b2, snatching a pawn right under the world champion's nose. Karpov swings his rook to e1, and Miles brings his queen to e5. When the pressure is immense, Karpov tries to stir up trouble with queen takes d7, and Miles responds with bishop to b4, attacking the rook. Karpov plays rook to e3, and Miles offers a queen trade with queen to d5. Karpov accepts, playing queen takes d5, and the bishop takes d5. The queens are off the board, but the nightmare for white is just beginning. The endgame is where Karpov usually eats people alive, but today the menu has changed. Karpov plays knight to c3, and Miles counters with rook to c8. The knight moves to e2, and Miles pushes pawn to g5, expanding his territory. Karpov tries to create some air with pawn to h4, the king moves to g7, and the pawn takes g5. Miles captures back with pawn takes g5. Karpov tries to activate his piece with bishop to d3, and Miles pushes pawn to a5. The rook moves to g3, and the king moves to f6, protecting the pawns. Karpov slides the rook to g4, and the bishop moves to d6. The white king moves to f1, but the black bishop moves to e5, dominating the board. Karpov brings his king to e1, and Miles swings the rook to h8. The finish is clinical. Karpov plays pawn to f4, Miles plays pawn takes f4, and the knight takes f4. Miles places his bishop on c6, and the knight moves to e2. The rook delivers a check on h1. The king moves to d2, and the rook returns to h2. Karpov plays pawn to g3, but Miles finds the killing blow, bishop to f3. The rook is trapped. Karpov tries rook to g8, but the rook takes g2. Karpov desperately tries king to e1, Miles plays bishop takes e2, and after bishop takes e2, Miles captures the last hope with rook takes g3. Finally, Karpov plays rook to a8, Miles plays bishop to c7, and the world champion, in the man who was supposed to be invincible, resigns 0-1. Tony Miles didn't just win a game of chess, he won a bet against the entire establishment. He proved that sometimes being incorrect is the most correct thing you can do if it puts your opponent in a state of confusion. The lesson here? Don't be afraid to step off the beaten path. If the world champion can lose to 1-6, you can definitely survive that weird opening your friend plays at the local club. What's the most disrespectful opening you've ever seen actually work? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into chess madness, smash that like button and subscribe for more legendary tales from the 64 squares. See you in the next one.